Aloha, I'm Kanoa Leahy. Welcome to another edition of Pewa by Hawaiʻi Community Foundation. Joining me today, Sheni Corpuz, Community Operations Director, and Eric Arcaro, who is the Executive Director of Kaibigan ng Lahaina, an organization that is looking to help facilitate services for the Filipino community here in the wake of the Lahaina fires. First question, did I pronounce the name of the organization correctly?
Yes, that was
Okay,
that was
all
pretty
right.
great.
good.
Okay, thank goodness. That's step number one. What does that mean? Kaibigan ng Lahaina. Where did the name come from?
Well, Kaibigan is the Tagalog or Filipino word for friend. We selected that name in particular because the root word of Kaibigan is actually ibig, which means love. So if you're translating Kaibigan, the literal translation would be someone who gives or receives love. And so that's why we chose it as our organization name.
Oh, well, that's beautiful. What was behind the establishment of this, the impetus for this organization and directing its services to the Filipino community in what methods?
So Kaibigan ng Lahaina was started because it was founded by Filipinos who are from and of Lahaina. Each one of us were trying to find ways in which we could assist with the immediate recovery right after the fires. So Sheni and her husband Ryan was helping Nestor Ugala, who's our board president, bring supplies into Lahaina. One of our founding members, who's a therapist, was providing mental health services, and really we realized that there was more power in sort of collaboration in unifying the community by really essentially unifying ourselves and our efforts. And so for us as an organization, we were, it started off as very sort of small, tangible items, whether or not we could provide food or basic necessities. And we recognized that for there to be an effective recovery or an effective long-term recovery, we really needed to anticipate and prepare for what those needs were going to be. So the organization formalized so that we could not only help our people recover from the disaster, but find resiliency, but also for our community to be able to thrive even beyond the disaster.
And Sheni, that's not just financial. That's not just assisting in some of the more tangible products, but we're talking about mental health. We're talking about the connection of this community as well. Correct?
Yes. So we launched our mental health program, our financial and our food distribution program. But we really realized that when we got together and talked, that we have an emotional responsibility to our community. And for us to be of Lahaina and to be Filipinos as well, I think it was really important for us to create a organic relationship with our community, a familial relationship. Someone that they know that they can trust, and they also know that we understand what they're going through.
Shani, if you could just expand perhaps on the importance of what you're talking about, trust within the community, identifying within the community, representation within the community. Could you just expand on the importance of that?
Yeah. Just an example. I have a family that. How long has it been since the fire? I mean, it's almost 2 years, and they came to us because this is the first time they've ever asked for help. And for us, again, being in the Filipino community where we don't always ask for help, we know they're in a vulnerable situation and feeling, but for them to be able to come to us because they trust us. I think we've opened those kind of doors for our Filipino community, and that's what's really important to us. And again, we'll meet them anywhere, even Seafood City. We actually have. We've had a few of our application interviews at Seafood City. And I mean, I'll even visit you at your lot while you're rebuilding. I mean, it's really creating a genuine relationship with our people is what's important to us.
What would be your vision if you had the will and the power to see what the future will hold for this Filipino community, even post fire recovery? What do you see?
The big picture for us has always been a sense of belonging and place for the Filipino community. um, to migrate to a new place, to sort of build a new life, can be is very difficult. And because we are people who have a place that we call home in the Philippines, we want Filipinos in our community to feel like Lahaina is home, that Maui is home. And so we understand that that's a lot of components, whether, from recovery to economic mobility. We want to be able to validate and make success viable for our community. So this is a key time to be able to do that, from recovery to possibly a better future for these families. But ultimately, our goal is that Filipinos will call Lahaina home for generations, that will be able to really embrace a lot of the Native Hawaiian values and priorities that are there too, and so that we can also be partners and contributors to the community.
Yeah, I just also want to point out that as we're doing this work as an organization, we're also finding ourselves in ways where, oh, I never knew about that about my culture. We're also relearning about our culture, which is so important to us. And also for my children, my child knows I work for a Filipino nonprofit, and she's very proud of that. She tells her teachers all the time. But instilling that um, sense of being proud of who you are and where you came from, that's very important to us too.
That's a remarkable statement, considering that this is stemming from what was a disaster in Lahaina, and to be able to extract from that, this positivity, or this possibility
Yes.
for change, positive change for your community. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing.
For Filipinos, we hold on to the value of bayanihan. As a community, you hold one another up. And we might be a Filipino focused organization, but our concern, our focus is for the entire Lahaina, for the entire Maui, to be able to 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 recover and to find resiliency and to find greater successes beyond what was pre-fire and what we're experiencing now post-fire.
So, with that said, what do you see as the challenges, as what would be considered obstacles in trying to establish this wonderful vision that you have for the future of the Filipino community?
Well, it starts with your immediate needs, which the biggest need is housing. So a lot of our Filipino community members, they are renters in Lahaina. So we want to make sure what we're advocating for and what we're hoping will come to fruition is that there is adequate, how affordable housing, for the Filipino community, for the entire community. But once we're able to take care of the housing portion, then we're also focusing on workforce development and how can we build a workforce that can be more adaptable. Maybe that's not so dependent on tourism, but perhaps in other areas. We want to be able to improve the workforce skills, professional development of our community, because in order to contribute economically and to contribute in not just in economic ways, but in other ways, you have to have a sense of responsibility. And it has to have more than just a economic or financial benefit for you. You have to be able to feel that sense of duty. And for Filipino, that comes naturally. But when you're coming into a place where you're an immigrant, you have to kind of learn and gain those things. So as we're addressing those needs like housing, financial mobility, workforce development, things like that, we're hoping that our Filipino community will see like there's an investment in your well-being from coming from all around you. So equally, you must also invest into the community that's feeding you.
All right, there's a sensitive aspect to this discussion as well. You talk about the varied tapestry of this community. There are people who are also considered immigrants in the Filipino community, and there is an administration currently in place that has established rhetoric that paints the immigrant community in a very negative light. And I would imagine that adds to then the challenges and some of the resistance to what you are trying to successfully establish. Could you talk a little bit more about that, even as it pertains to some of the housing issues, just some of the policy that is currently in place that pushes back against what you guys are doing?
It's just so tough because recently we have the county has received 1.6 billion from CDBGDR, which is a disaster recovery fund, and they've been very adamant about, they do have to follow HUD guidelines, and this percentage is what we call an AMI percentage. And we all looked at that table and really just chuckled because I don't even qualify for this. What more a hardworking Filipino family that has 2 or 3 jobs, they're not going to qualify for this. So then again, there's that gap, right? How are we going to help this percentage that can't qualify for absolutely anything? And it's really tough because if we were an organization that had um, I don't know, $50 billion, we would help all of these gaps. But it's tough. So
Yeah, I think something to consider is the cost of living is already so high, and then like in Lahaina, it's even more challenging because of the natural sort of economic dependency on tourism. To live in Lahaina pre-fire, you had to be making well above 60 or even $70,000 to be financially viable. So in Filipino households where it's usually multi-income, right? It's not just mom and dad who has a job. It might be auntie and uncle who's living in the same roof also has a job. So these families all of a sudden become ineligible for programs that require an AMI percentage comparison. So a lot of our families, they're seeing these opportunities for assistance, but they're kind of getting discouraged because they'll never qualify for those programs. And as much as we want to encourage them to maybe go around those rules, it's still very hard to live in Lahaina, to live in Hawaii on an income of less than $100,000. So that's why for a lot of Filipino homes that are multi-generational, you're gonna see more than one family unit in a home, because that's the only way that they can survive. That's the only way that they can remain here and to be able to put together that pot of money. So when you're looking at numbers and you're saying, well, this is how many properties were lost in Lahaina, that doesn't account for how many actual residences were there, because it's very normal for people in the Filipino community, for siblings, for family members to band their income together to be able to afford that home. Um, and so that's one of the things that we're trying to make sense for our community is how do you balance what some of these programming requirements or these assistance requirements are with the reality of the cost of living here. Um, and it's tough. It's difficult to have those conversations with community members, to give them hope, but then to look at the fine print and realize that they might not be eligible candidates for that assistance.
So when you solicit further help from the community, people who want to get involved, there are ways that they can connect with you. But tangibly, what can people do, in your opinion, to help here going forward?
I think realistically, we're asking, in the different sort of levels, if we're asking our government officials, we're asking them to advocate for what is the real life challenges that our community is facing in regards to rebuilding and remaining economically viable, to remain in Hawaii. If we're asking the community, we're asking them to share their voices, to share their stories, because we can advocate as much until we're blue in the face, but we want the community to feel empowered to share their stories. And that's a challenge for the Filipino community because, again, not everyone wants to come out and ask for help, but this is the time where we have to sort of really find unity in our struggles, but also unity in our voices to make sure that everyone can get taken care of.
yeah, I think the goal is to humanize recovery, right? Take away all the percentages and the Excel sheets and the tables, and really listen to the voices of our community and the community leaders, because it's a totally different picture from your Excel sheets and from a community's perspective. So,
And I want to add, like, policy doesn't always consider cultural values.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And the cultural values part is what we're hoping our government officials, what sort of these big player stakeholders are able to listen to, is there's a cultural component that we're paying attention to. And if people are investing in our work through grants and through donations, then we're also hoping that they consider those cultural components, because there's no way to successfully do recovery here in Hawaii if you're not considering what those cultural values are. And like Sheni said, making recovery a human effort, not just a policy effort.
Well, your organization's approach and services, they do carry a clinical lens with them, with the attention to case management and mental health specifically. And there is a cultural component to that as well. So, how are you reaching out to these people? How are you connecting with them on those terms?
Specifically, our mental health program, we talked very long and hard when we were about to launch this project, because there's so many mental health initiatives out there, right? And we wanted to make sure that we were culturally sensitive to our people. Mental health is such a big taboo to us, even for not only for men but for women. I was raised, if I cried, don't cry, figure it out, you know. And the ways that we're meeting our people, and I'm gonna give you a great example, is one of our, we call them our therapy knives. They're all three very intelligent women in our team of therapists. And what she specifically does is, before she starts a session, is she brings out a pastry called pandesal. And pandesal is a very iconic, I call it merienda or snack in the Philippines. I remember coming home from school and my mom would, bring pandesal for my merienda, and that would be our talking point where she asks about my day, and this is mental healing for us, right? So yeah, our therapist comes out with pandesal, and again, that's a familial thing for our survivor, and that just opens up the floodgates of therapy.
And we approach everything with a cultural emphasis.
Always, yeah.
So for Filipinos, the the act of talking story is really big, whether it's tungtungan or pakasarsaritan. There's names for that because those are components of our culture that bring familiarity but also build that relationship. So we're not just agents of recovery, we're really trying to be people's friends. We're really trying to be Kaibigan ng Lahaina in its literal sense.
Are you seeing a little bit more openness to some of this from members of the Filipino community?
Absolutely. Just being able to converse in your native tongue and language about how you're feeling and what's happening with you. I think that's really big, because I'm going to share something really personal. But my father-in-law, we did the remembrance ride at Front Street, and this was a couple of months ago. And that day, I had evacuated with them, and I've never seen my father-in-law cry, or he's never talked about that day. Um, but after the remembrance ride, I remembered someone, a therapist, come up to him, and she was actually Filipino. She came up to him and she said something to him. And I know it was only 3 or 4 words, but he started to cry and he started to talk about that day. And I knew then how important it is to be able to connect with our community in a way that we know they'll be able to open up and be familiar with it. So the mental health initiative is so important, and such a project that we're so proud of, and we hope to be able to continue it for a very long time.
Thank you for sharing that personal story. And it seems as though that's what's oftentimes required, right? Are those certain touchstones,
Yep.
the connective tissue of nostalgia,
Mhm.
as well as dealing with some of this tragedy, and that can work as a trigger to
Yep.
open the floodgates in many ways, to
Absolutely.
actually allow people to share, even if it's not something that they're normally used to doing, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing better of a referral than a referral that comes from a family member or friend. So as more and more of our community members are getting these services, we're finding more openness because they're sharing their stories, their experiences. And like Shani said, there's nothing like being able to share something that is as personal as your recovery or your healing process, than to be able to share it in your language.
Mhm.
And there are emotions that can only be known and expressed in our native Filipino tongue.
So you talk about the usage of language, the application of language and the familiarity there. Would you be willing to share with us here on Capeva just some phrases or phrasing in that language that you feel like you would say to people as you are going through this community outreach?
Mahal na mahal ko ang Lahaina. I don't even think, sorry, I don't even think there's enough words to express that in any language. And that means I love Lahaina so much. I've decided to move back home and raise my children here, and may dahilan yun. Talagang mahal na mahal ko ang Lahaina.
And one of the phrases that we sort of adopt is Agbyag ti Lahaina, which means long live Lahaina or Mabuhay Lahaina. It's sort of just a simple chant to really encourage our people to find, not just to find long life in our town and in our community.
Could you give people a sense of just how large this community is? I think anyone who's lived or grown up in Hawaii understands the Filipino community makes up a huge part of the demographic. What kind of percentage are we talking about? And are there challenges then in trying to bring together a community of that size?
Sure, we anticipate there's probably around 4,000 or more Filipino community members in West Maui. And there are challenges because I think it's very easy to generalize a ethnic group of people based off of, if you come from the same place. But the Filipino community is not a monolithic community. We have different cultures, we have different languages. And something that's very sort of unique is we all have different immigration experiences. You have Filipinos who have been in Lahaina or on Maui or in Hawaii for centuries through the Sakaras. And then you have families who immigrated here, in the 80s, 90s, and even very recently.
How receptive to some of the assistance that you're trying to provide has or have members of this community been? Oftentimes, culturally speaking, there are people who are resistant to that kind of thing. Have you found that to be at all an obstacle?
Well, not an obstacle. So, our community, again, is the type of community that doesn't ask for help. Where we work hard, we keep our heads down. If we have to work 2 or 3 jobs, we'll do it to support our family. So it's very vulnerable for a Filipino member of the community to ask for help. We've specifically created and launched these programs where it would meet culturally the kind of like barriers that our community has. So in a way, like for me, for example, if I had to pick between Seafood City and I don't know, like a Vietnamese place, I would, walk into that restaurant where I see Filipinos and I see Filipino food, and that's what we are hoping to establish here, is that they have one of their own to support them and to help them, and they know that we understand what they're going through.
Well, Kaibigan ng Lahaina is a recent recipient of support from the Hawaii Community Foundation's Maui Strong Fund. How does that support help bolster your efforts, and specifically, where does some of that funding go?
That's quite a very important question. I think prior to receiving the grant from Hawaii Community Foundation, we were doing everything based off of voluntary hours. I mean, we all had full-time jobs, and so we were putting as much time as we could to the work. And so now, number one, HCF allows us to have a consistent and continual presence in the community. It allows us to hire staff to assist us with that, but it also allows us to really create programming that addresses the cultural needs of our community. To have to go through disaster recovery is so challenging already. So our work is really trying to create that recovery process through programs that is familiar, that is culturally sensitive, but that's also going to be very effective. And these grant funds allow us to assure that all of those target points can be met.
Are you seeing any impacts? Are there any anecdotal success stories, for lack of a better term, that you'd be willing to share with us here?
I think a really just a recent success story that we had, and this one stands out because the main issue really was the language barrier. With all the insurance jargon and all these contracts that our families have to read, yes, they can understand the English, but they can't really comprehend. Um, and just a really quick example, a family that was denied from their SBA loan previously. After reading their contract, all they saw was the word denied, and then
Mm.
we had our community care navigator who's bilingual really look into the contract. We read it over and over again, and we explained to them, "Hey, there's a reason why you got denied, and it's a really easy fix." And at between that time, this family has already gone from bank to bank asking for loans and was denied over and over again. So we were able to reappeal the decision. They got approved, and that completely closed their rebuilding gap. And just to see this family come back into the offices with their heads held up high and their shoulders back, it's this is where I get my validation from for the work I do, because I know, excuse me, I know that not only have we helped this family stay in Lahaina, but as a Filipino family, I have family that I support in another country in the Philippines. And the father of the household said, you're for us to be able to stay in Lahaina, you're helping me help my three other families that are in the Philippines, and they can still go to college and still go to school. So it's huge. You're not only helping the immediate family that needs to stay in Lahaina, but I know I'm technically helping their entire family clan. So
Well, I can see right off the bat how much this affects you personally. This is something that you are both seemingly emotionally invested in. How much of a driving force and motivation is that for you on what is the daily grind of trying to affect positively this community?
Absolutely. Like Lahaina is everything. Like I was raised in Lahaina. Sheni is raising her kids in Lahaina. The community means much more than just the homes that were lost. It's the place, it's the aina, but it's also the people. And so our work really calls us to meet our people where they are. And no matter what their situation is, to come with a lot of compassion. And it's not just because we face disaster, but because we have a great sense of duty as Filipinos, but also because we have a great sense of duty because Lahaina is home.
You know, one of the things that happens in the wake of a disaster like what we saw in Lahaina in 2023, it sometimes exposes certain services gaps for various segments of the community. Uh, that can bring about perhaps opportunities for change and improvement in trying to fill those gaps. So, what have you observed here, and how maybe can this effort that you are putting forth affect the community, and maybe even bring together certain ways in which the community can more benefit generally, as opposed to just specifically with regard to the fire recovery efforts?
Sure, I think naturally programming with disaster recovery will always sort of evolve based on the needs of what the community is. What we're looking at now is a lot of our community members are trying to find that healing. They're trying to be able to find closure in that the first 19 months, which has been difficult. And so now we're transitioning to a place of how do we focus programming so that there's long-term efficacy, so that there's long-term effects. We want to do programming that is practical for sure, but we also want to do programming that inspires them, that's going to inspire them to stay, that's going to inspire them to raise their children in Lahaina, to inspire them to contribute back to the community as the community rebuilds and comes back to a place where everyone feels like they can feel safe again.
Sheni, the recovery is going to take a long time. How much of a long-term strategy has been discussed and is likely to be applied here for even the generations that are going to be present past when hopefully we are able to say it has been a full recovery?
I think it's very critical to point out that us as an organization, yes, we were helping immediately after the fire, but we really banded together. And I call this band, we're like the Avengers here. Um, we really wanted to create an organization that would last um, 30, 40, 50 years. My personal motivation in doing the work that I do is because I have children. I might not see the fruits of my labor in the next 2, 3, 4 years, but I know my children will, and I know the future of Lahaina, which is the Keiki, will. And so I that's my driving force, and my future is my children, and I want them to be able to in a town that's just full of culture and beauty, and we want to bring that back and maybe even bring a better Lahaina, and this is our chance because it's a clean slate. We when we design these programs, we're always thinking 5 years ahead, how is this going to help our community? So we're about to launch our workforce development programs, and hopefully also support our Kiki in the high schools and in the college.
What's the best way people can learn more about your organization, what it does, and information on how perhaps they can even get involved?
Sure, they can visit our website at www.kaibigannanglahaina.org. We have social media pages both on Facebook and Instagram. You can email us at info@kaibigannanglahaina.org. And you can even call us. You can reach us at 808-303-8289.
I like to, with all of the interview subjects here on Kapeva, give you the floor here. If there has been something that hasn't been touched upon, or if there is another aspect of this discussion that you feel you would like to present here, I want to give you guys the opportunity there.
Right. As an organization, we also want to point out that we are the organization that's trying to make sure our community is empowered in decision making in their recovery. Not only are we trying to meet their immediate unmet needs, but longevity and sustainability is really our goal here, and that we're going to be here for a very long time.
And we welcome anybody in the community who's needing assistance to come and talk story with us. We are your neighbors. We are your friends. We might be even your family members. And so we're committed to Lahaina, like many other organizations are, and we'll continue to work for our community as long as it takes and as how hard it requires us to.
Well, I thank you guys for your efforts. Truly wish you the best here going forward. And mahalo for being part of Kapeva.
Mahalo.
So much. Salamat.
Salamat.